Hello and welcome back to our podcast. This is episode 5, and today we're going to be talking about autoimmune disease, what it is, what it entails, how it's potentially caused, and other such like things. Today we have with us our friend Pete, who I'll let Dan introduce because he's known a lot longer than I have.
Yeah, so I've known Pete for over 10 years. I think it's coming up to 12 years.
It's really 12.
Yeah, nearly 12 years. Been my best friend for a long time. And I'll let him introduce himself because nobody can tell you better what he does or than him.
Thanks for that. So I've got a bit of a medical background. I'd say fairly basic. It's predominantly focused at trauma, so your car accidents and some other juicy stuff that I can't go into. And then outside of that, I did a lot of primary healthcare stuff as well. Currently, I am studying to become a paramedic. So I have a little bit of a medical background, I should say. So I've got about 8 years experience in it.
Yeah, a little bit more than a little, but yeah.
Uh, eh, eh.
Doesn't give
You also
himself
help
quite
teach
enough
sort
credit
of.
for it.
Yeah. You've also helped teach people too.
Uh, Trauma. It's all
Yeah.
about the trauma. Trauma's easy. Trauma is easy. Primary healthcare. Eh, coughs and colds can get complicated,
Yeah.
particularly this day and age.
Yeah. Especially whenever you have people thinking that they need to go to the doctor because they have a cold.
Yeah. A little sniffle.
I mean, right now, yes, you probably should, but
Yeah.
No, they even recommend you that you don't. You can call in and see what they say and then they'll get you tested.
yeah.
Um, but anyway, back to the autoimmune. Uh, we'll just quickly go over uh, what exactly autoimmune is. So it is a disease that is caused by antibodies or lymphocytes produced against substances naturally present in the body. So simply put, autoimmune disorders happen when the body's own immune system attacks itself. And this can express itself in a variety of different ways depending on the person. So you can have things that attack your joints, autoimmune disease that attacks your joints, and that would be rheumatoid arthritis. You have the likes of multiple sclerosis, which is the autoimmune attacking the nerves. You have psoriasis, which is the skin. Graves' disease, which is the thyroid. You also have vasculitis, which is blood vessels. Did I say celiac? So that one's the gut.
You haven't mentioned that yet, no.
Yeah, so there's so many different conditions, and you have other ones that attack some of the same places, but would be different types of autoimmune conditions, like Hashimoto's disease. I think that's another thyroid one, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and there's lupus. If you ever watch House, that's the most famous thing that it
Yeah,
never is. Yeah, so you have
yeah.
lupus. I actually know somebody with lupus. Um,
Okay, that's brutal.
yeah, that's a systemic one, so that affects you all around the body, which is quite
Yeah,
nasty.
it messes you up. It messes
Yeah.
you up.
So those are some examples of autoimmune disease. Um, the cause of autoimmune disease, currently, it's not really known. There's some theories out there, saying, kind of guessing at what it could be, but the triggers are different for everybody who has them. So it's really difficult to actually diagnose. Well, it's easy to diagnose an autoimmune, but it's difficult to cure or treat an autoimmune condition.
I
So
think just to jump in there, I think because we've discussed this already before, just off camera, but the general consensus is the scientific community doesn't know what causes or why
yeah,
the body reacts the way it does. They know some of the triggers for things,
yeah,
um, but for the most part, we don't know why the body reacts the way it does with this stuff.
yeah. The only one that we do know is celiac. So that's the only, from what I can tell, the only autoimmune condition that we definitively know it is caused by gluten. So by cutting out all gluten, you can completely omit any of the effects of the condition.
Yeah.
And that's the
So
only one that we
as
know
far as I
the
can
cause of.
tell, as far
Yeah.
as I can find, like there's other ones that we know, like there's some viruses that can trigger MS, um, but again,
Yeah.
they don't really understand the mechanism behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you just mentioned something there, and I can't off the top of my head recall what it is that triggers MS, for example, or what they think might do. But
measles
you've got the
can
likes.
do it.
So yeah, you've got various measles, meningitis, perhaps,
Hmm.
but you've got shingles. So I think
Yeah.
the virus for shingles can, and I could be slightly wrong here, but from recollection, it can end up resulting in one of these conditions that then leads to an autoimmune condition later down the line.
Yeah. So what I've been doing in my research, and I think Pete, I briefly mentioned to Pete earlier in the week, and he did a little bit of digging into it as well. But there's an interesting thing that I found regarding something called molecular mimicry. So this was originally sort of the term molecular mimicry was originally used to describe uh, the sharing of antigenic structures such as proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates between a parasite and a host. So the parasite being the virus in the case of MS, I think we said already. So when you get the virus, it infects a cell. The parasite looks a lot like the host. So the immune system attacks the host cell as well as the parasite to create the condition. So that's sort of currently what's happening, or what people think. It was originally referred to, or in a published book. I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head. I probably should have had it written down, but I think it was in like the 1960s at some point where the term molecular mimicry was sort of coined. Um, but there hasn't been an awful lot of research from what I've been able to find giving any kind of cold hard evidence saying that this is exactly what's causing this. It's just a lot of it's speculation at the minute, but it seems to be the most likely, from what I can tell, or one of the best ways to explain why what's happening is happening.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Yeah, you've touched on it anyway, but I think what you were saying was it was originally defined as a protective response to a pathogen, or as you say, like a parasite or something like that. And it's just it's like almost like a confusion to the system is maybe a simpler, like the immune system's kind of confused.
Yeah.
And then
So
it ends up doing what it does, which is attacks itself. It's hence why it is then known as an autoimmune disorder or condition.
yeah,
So,
because it starts attacking the host, which the pathogen is infected. If you know how a virus works, you have the little, what is it, the phage thing goes in, attaches itself to the cell, injects the DNA sequence into the cell, and then the body doesn't really know what to do with it because it alters it and starts reacting in a way that it shouldn't react.
mhm.
But because it's so similar to the original host cell, the body starts attacking similar cells as well.
So I assume, even though we don't know for the most part what causes autoimmune disease, obviously you said there was a book from the 60s that,
A journal, or I'm not sure if it was exactly a book, but a journal, a medical journal, or
yeah.
some sort of research paper journal.
So I assume that they didn't just give up and say, well, we'll figure it out at some point. I assume there's still large amounts of research that are going into trying to figure out what causes these things.
So surprisingly, there may be research going on, but it's not a field that's been looked into, from what I've seen anyway. It's not looked into a huge amount, or as much as it maybe could be. Like, say for example, you've got your big things like cancer, which does take up a lot of resources and a lot of funding and a lot of people skilled within molecular science and human body science and whatnot. This is one of the ones that, because it maybe doesn't necessarily affect such huge swathes of people, although you'd be surprised probably how many people have or suffer from autoimmune. Um, from what I've seen, what I've read up, the science isn't being invested or looked into as much as it maybe could be. So
Well, I'm kind of thinking, there's not really much of a financial incentive for companies to figure out how to cure these diseases because they have treatments that can help with it, and they would much rather push those things. Like, so a normal prescription for an autoimmune disease would
big
be
pharma.
big pharma, yeah. So you'd have your NSAIDs, your non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. You also have some. They also prescribe a lot of immunosuppressant drugs because this is an immune response. They give you immunosuppressants, sort of like corticosteroids. What would be a good example of that? Like prednisolone and stuff like that. Can't remember off the top of my head. And then you have a variety of different types of inhibitors as well that you can give to it, but I don't see that as being a healthy way of dealing with autoimmune reactions because you're just pumping medication into it. How would you? What's your opinion on treating things with drugs rather than trying to find the root cause?
From my perspective, or Mikey's,
With both.
for me, I personally try to avoid drugs
Oops.
as best I can. So I suffer from psoriasis, which is classed as an autoimmune, where basically the skin cells over replicate. Simply put, they over replicate. I think it's partially to do with blood. I can't remember the ins and outs of it. I will use shampoos for I've got scalp psoriasis. There's various different types. Plaque psoriasis is quite debilitating. You've got psoriasis that affects the joints, which leads to rheumatoid-like um, arthritic stuff as well. I use shampoos and things because if I don't, I will be scratching my hair out, scratching the skin off the top of my scalp whenever I get flare-ups. But outside of that, I try to avoid drugs as best I can. I'm not a big. They have a purpose, but I try to avoid drugs as best I can personally. So
Yeah, I'm much the same. If there's a natural way I can deal with it, I'll deal with it. If through diet or exercise or sleep or something, just
yeah, like
figure it out.
Mikey, you've had obviously it's not necessarily autoimmune, but you've had issues with your skin over the years. Have you
I mean, it very
gone?
well could be autoimmune for all I know.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose it could very well, as you say. But have you had much experience with using various different drugs? I'm sure you probably have, but have you had any?
Yeah, so I've had like really bad acne since I was probably about 14, around 14, I would say. And since then, the doctors put me on at least three different courses of prescriptions. I know one of them was a antibiotic, uh, which from what people have told me since, there's literally no point to be on an antibiotic for something like acne.
No, because it ruins a whole
Yeah,
other ton of systems in the body, killing
yeah.
all the gut flora, making or I said Florida, gut flora.
All right, American.
Okay, Tampa.
Yeah, well, that's where I was born. So
Yeah.
On an airbase.
Um.
yeah,
Yeah. So I know I've been on at least three courses. The way for me, the way it's always happened is, it'll be, let's say, a 6 week course. 3 weeks in, it appears to be doing its job. By the time it gets to the end of it, it's done a little bit, and then it's stopped. So I still have acne. It's not as bad as it was whenever I started, but it's not by any means cleared. And that could just be that it happens to coincide with whenever it calms down naturally, because it kind of seems to go
Goes
in
through
cycles
cycles.
where it almost goes away and then it flares back up, then it almost goes away, then it flares back up.
yeah. Have you been able to figure out what might trigger it?
Nope, haven't even
Have
come
you?
close. I've cut loads of things out of my diet. I've cut dairy out. I've cut um I've cut breads out. I've cut uh pretty much anything you can think of. Like I've went on like I've never gone vegetarian.
Yeah.
Uh and I've never stayed away from vegetables per se.
Uh-huh.
But I have gone on like fish only diets and stuff where the only meat I'm eating is fish. And I know a lot of people for some reason don't count fish as meat, but it's
Well, it's
definitely meat.
flesh.
It's
It's
definitely
flesh,
meat.
isn't it?
Um,
You're
That,
pescatarian.
that's that's
um,
if someone's going on about stuff like that, they're being pedantic, aren't
yeah.
they? We know
So
what you mean. We know what you mean.
I
I've
don't
never
even
found
classify
anything.
fishes as pets. To me, they're just decoration you have to feed.
Yeah. Um,
Brutal.
I've never found anything that has specifically triggered it or specifically helped it. Although whenever the 1 week I did carnivore, it was clearing up by the end of the week. Initially, for the start of that week, it got really bad, and then by the end of the week, it was 10 times better than it has been recently. Now that could just be to do with I might have been lacking in something, like
Well, I think we talked
iron
about
or
this before about
calcium or anything. Yeah,
the drug Roaccutane being a vitamin A derivative.
yeah,
And whenever you're
yeah.
on
I think we talked
an
about that
animal
last
based,
week.
yeah, whenever you're on an animal based diet, you get ample amounts of vitamin A, and that does help with
Yeah,
skin conditions.
yeah,
Yeah, so this would be it's a good segue into my major point with autoimmune and the likes of medication and the overarching theme that I try to push in these podcasts, which is your nutrition matters uh, for everything that you do when it comes to health, because it's literally the building blocks that your body has or uses to express your genes optimally. So when it comes to autoimmune, there have been other research again regarding molecular mimicry and a few other different things when it comes to plant toxins. As with, I keep stumbling over my words today.
Don't worry about it. I do it every day.
Yeah. Hey, we all do. It's grand.
Too many
Yeah.
punches to the head.
Yeah, well, I've mentioned a few times in other podcasts that there are anti-nutrients in plant foods. So you have things like oxalates, which are oxalic acids. You have phytates, phytic acids. You have protease inhibitors, which inhibit the digestion of certain proteins. There are goitrogens and tannins. I think tannins is another one. They get a lot of that in teas. But then we have the likes of lectins. I think I briefly mentioned before. So currently, the the idea is that when we were evolving, us with the plants, animals have the ability to run away, fight, and defend themselves. Plants don't have that ability, so they need to come up with another way to defend themselves against things trying to eat them. Like bacteria, pests, parasites, insects, animals, you name it. One of the ways that they developed that is they created these chemicals in the system known as lectins. So there are a few examples of lectins in nature that I wanted to talk about. Mostly kidney beans. Red kidney beans are the main thing that people talk about. If you eat raw kidney beans, it can kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you
So
discussed before a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
I like to go
interesting.
back to these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not?
So
Well, it's
yeah,
all
they
a
have
big circle.
yeah. So red kidney beans have something in it called phytohemagglutinin, and it's a sugar binding protein that causes red blood cells and white blood cells to clump together. Um, Apparently, that makes it easier for them to find and kill what was it?
So you were explaining earlier to me, it's like a
Yeah.
defense mechanism against the likes of insects and things like that.
Yeah, in the plant, but whenever we ingest them, as whenever a human ingests them. So these are the effects that it has on a human. So anything with blood, essentially, if you eat raw a certain amount of raw kidney, even one raw kidney bean can cause very, very uncomfortable gastric distress. So
Oh,
anything in your guts. Hmm?
it can be debilitating.
Yeah, it's quite debilitating. If you eat higher amounts of them, it can prove to be quite fatal. I don't know if anybody's watched Breaking Bad, but one of the
Nope.
main. You've never watched Breaking Bad?
Nope.
Oh, I've watched
Oh,
bits of it.
anyone who has,
Pop
they'll know.
culture referencing.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a show that popularized. I know that there are some spy things, real life examples of people being assassinated with this anyway. So it's called ricin.
Yeah.
So it is a lectin as well. Uh, and it's found in certain types of beans, but you can synthesize that out and turn it into a poison. Just a small amount of ricin can kill a person. What it does is it actually shuts down protein synthesis. So these plants have created these different things to make it undesirable for animals to eat them, essentially. Uh,
The other one that was talked about off camera as well that you mentioned was cyanide as well, which we all know about, and it's
yeah,
naturally occurring. The one that I remember being told whenever I was probably in primary school was you could find this is where I'm horribly wrong, but I'm pretty sure I looked at it earlier online. Cyanide can be found in apple seeds and various different seeds,
yeah,
and it's not necessarily. it's not necessarily there in its purest form, but it metabolizes once it sort of enters the body and then becomes cyanide essentially.
Yeah, and
Um,
if you eat a high enough amount, you could have the same kind of result. So, and again, the reason the plant wants to do that is because it doesn't want you actually eating its seed. It doesn't. The plant wants you to consume the seed and pass it through, but it doesn't want you to actually destroy the seed and eat the seed, if you know what I mean. Like actually chewing on the seed. If you do that, then that's when you release those harmful chemicals. Same thing with broccoli. So, broccoli has two chemicals in it. I don't remember what the name is, but when you bite into it, it breaks down the cell wall, and then those two chemicals combine to create sulforaphane, and that's kind of what causes that uncomfortable bloating and well, it's got sulfur in it. Imagine the smells. If you have if you eat a lot of cruciferous vegetables, you get this gaseous effect.
Brussels
It
sprouts.
doesn't smell so. Yeah, no, Brussels sprouts are one
Yeah.
of the cruciferous vegetables. So you have broccoli, Brussels sprouts,
More like Lucifer's
cabbage.
vegetables.
Yeah. Um, Other examples, though, of plants containing lectins are obviously nuts, seeds, and legumes, which are, again, all forms of seeds. So nature doesn't want you eating them because if you eat them, they can't reproduce. So they have high levels of these lectins to deter animals from eating them. Other ones would be nightshades as well. Nightshades have some level of. That's why you should never eat a raw potato. They're not good. They're a form of nightshade. Tomatoes are a nightshade.
quick one. So again, we were talking about this a wee bit earlier, but one that I came across that you and I were discussing a wee bit, Dan. Mikey, whenever you hear of goji berries, what do you think?
Goji berries?
Yeah, like what are they sold to us as? Like what?
Um, I don't know. I don't really eat berries.
No, well, I certainly I've tried these before. I was never the biggest fan, but
I
they're
think
always
I'm pretty sure I've tried them. I'm pretty sure you had them before in the
Yeah,
house,
I did.
Dan. Yeah.
Yeah, I did like an overnight oats thing. Mine was worse though, because when we get into what Pete's trying to say, I had like oats, goji berries, and chia seeds and almond milk.
Yeah. Are
Yeah. So
they
this is
aren't
just like this big lectin cockpit, or not cockpit. What's the word?
concoction.
Concoction. That's it.
Yeah.
um are they the ones with the little like eye in them?
The goji
Uh,
berries?
yeah.
No.
They're red and they're usually dehydrated, and then they got a seed in the middle of them as
Yeah, did you
well.
call them goji raisins?
Yeah, probably.
I know
And
there's a lot of like Japanese like programs and stuff, animes, whatever that they've been mentioned in.
yeah, they would be actually, I think. But they're sold generally as like this superfood, which was the thing that's like once I started looking into this, the lectin side of things. Obviously, we're going to come back to the autoimmune aspect of things, but um, whenever you're starting to read about like these particular foods that are sold to us as like superfoods, um, that then turn to be, for example, high in like the likes of lectins, which then in turn could cause these immune responses that then result in like a chronic autoimmune condition. It's just crazy that like going back to some of the other stuff that you guys have talked in previous podcasts, like how diets can just affect so much of this sort of stuff. It's like goji berries, you mentioned the chia seeds as well, Dan. Like all these things that are sold to us is like super duper crazy, all singing, all dancing, gonna miracle cure your body into super health. It's just mental.
Well, for a
Yeah,
long
and
time that was kale.
Yeah, kale, prime
yeah.
example.
No,
Yeah.
kale, that's another cruciferous vegetable. Here's a funny thing. Ruminant animals don't even want to eat it. That's how bad it is. But it's easy to grow because they have these high levels of lectins. They are naturally resistant to pests. You don't need to spray them with pesticides. So they're easy to grow, easy to monetize. You just have to sell it to a bunch of people that think, oh, this is healthy food, so I'm going to eat it because I know it's going to make me, or I'm being told it's going to make me healthy, but
Yeah.
it's not. You give a piece of kale to a cow, it will refuse it because it's disgusting. Have you ever had kale? It is disgusting. I tried so
I
hard
mean,
to like it.
cows eat
Kale's good.
grass.
Yeah.
Grass doesn't taste very nice, trust me.
I
Yeah,
don't even want to know why you've been eating grass.
but that's the natural food for a cow. I'm just saying
Yeah.
cruciferous vegetables, they won't eat necessarily cruciferous vegetables because of this. It makes them feel uncomfortable. And if they do, they only eat small amounts. So animals have this clever thing where they don't eat too much of a particular plant food because it will give them indigestion as well and it will make them feel sick. If you ever have a population of say deer in a forest, and it's overpopulated, and they're competing for different food sources, and they're having to stick to one particular food source, they end up getting sick and dying. So they need to vary their food intake as well, because plants can be toxic. Too much of anything is bad. So same thing with spinach. I think we talked about this before with oxalic acid, where if you eat too much spinach, you can end up with kidney stones because it binds to the calcium. Your kidneys try to flush that out, and then you get issues.
Yeah.
So some of the other ones, like some of the other high in lectin ones, which would maybe explain the likes of like celiacs, for example, is your grains and flours, which obviously contain gluten. I don't know if gluten itself is classed. Well, it's not. It's clearly not classed as a lectin.
And no, it actually is.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah,
there you go.
it's a carbohydrate binding protein.
So there you go. And as we know,
Nailed
the
it.
one condition that we know what triggers it. Again, we don't know why the body responds the way it does to gluten, but we know that gluten triggers that celiacs, that almost degrading body cell destructing condition that then we know as celiacs.
It turns out that gluten triggers everybody. So they've done studies on this. Again, I don't have the study on hand. I would need to find it. But people that are non-celiac, if you introduce gluten to their diet, they will have a reaction. It's just not as debilitating as the likes of celiac. People that are gluten sensitive will have a bit more of a reaction. People that are just normal with gluten have a better reaction. But there's always a reaction, and it's an inflammatory reaction. It's just with celiac, they have no tolerance for it.
So
So
similar to
gluten is
dairy then?
similar to dairy, but
Yeah.
that would be the lactose in dairy. If you remove some of that
Yeah.
and the sugars from there, dairy is typically fine.
Yeah.
It's the lactose in dairy that's bad. So like people with that can't tolerate butter because of the lactose in the butter, if you clarify the butter and remove the milk solids, they can tolerate it just fine.
Yeah.
It's the milk fats are fine.
Yeah.
Milk is mostly water as well. So again, if you separate out the lactose, which is a type of sugar, a fermentable sugar, by the way, I think there's something called the FODMAPs, but it ferments in your gut, and that's what creates those issues.
Yeah.
You also have caseins as well that can cause other issues in cheeses and stuff like that when it comes to diarrhea, or not diarrhea, constipation. It can cause constipation. Apparently, some people metabolize casein, it sort of ferments into almost like an opium, and uh, yeah, so that inhibits peristalsis in the gut, so it stops the smooth muscle from contracting, so you can't actually push out fecal matter. So cheese can constipate certain people.
What a way to lower the tone, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things with a lot of this stuff and autoimmune conditions in general is the diagnosis process can
Okay.
take literally years
Hmm.
before someone finds out. So my other half, she suffers from celiacs, where something like psoriasis, you can look at the skin, go that is possibly psoriasis, and then they can do various tests and things. The likes of like say celiacs and a number of other ones, um, it can either get misdiagnosed for years and years and years, or it just doesn't get picked up on until the person is has been tested for a number of other things. Um, and it could be from someone excluding something from the diet, as we've been talking about, the likes of like say excluding in that case gluten. Um, and it can be a long old process before you actually find out you are suffering from whatever it is you're suffering for, before they can actually put a label to it, and then you can start working towards improving your lifestyle, changing your lifestyle, be it diet, be it what you do, going out for exercise, whatever it is that may assist with lessening the condition.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I have a cousin who has no, I don't think it's an autoimmune disease,
Mm-hmm.
but she's gone for the past, I don't know, probably 12 years now, where she hasn't been able to work because the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her. And it could very well be some form of a autoimmune disease because they can't figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot more common for people that have things like celiac or some of these other things to go undiagnosed for a long time.
Yeah, because
I
it's
think
Go for it, John. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Because they may have one or two symptoms. And they'll suffer with those one or two symptoms, and then maybe they'll subside. For whatever reason, they subside. Be it they've unknowingly cut out whatever the trigger may be, to then come up with something else. Like again, I keep referring to celiacs. It's the one I know a little bit more about. I know I've got psoriasis, which is quite funny. I should know more about that, shouldn't I? But having chatted with getting things like brain fog, maybe obviously last episode 3, you guys were saying about brain fog. I don't think that's due to you guys being glutened or hit with something or other that's autoimmune, but like that's one of the many symptoms, and this is the problem with a lot of these well, some of the conditions. I wouldn't say a lot of them. Some of them are a bit more straightforward and can be explained a lot more, but there's so many, in a lot of cases, so many different signs and symptoms associated with each condition that it makes it difficult to diagnose in the first place.
Yeah, because
As
they're all
you
so
say,
similar. It's
yeah,
like
and a lot
if
of
you have
cases,
any symptoms of anything, you look on the internet and immediately you have cancer.
yeah, yeah.
Did you
Or
eat red meat
the minute,
yesterday?
oh,
You're gonna have a heart attack today. Yeah. Which,
it's like
by
with
the way, I'm
meat.
starting to think is a conspiracy theory to increase the prices of meat. So,
Oh, they're
like,
trying.
this
They're
is a
already trying to do that.
luxury.
They're
This is a
trying to do
luxury.
meat taxes and things like that in America, as far as I'm aware, because apparently it's unhealthy and they're trying to treat it like
Yeah,
sugar.
yeah. See, it's just conspiracy theory. They're just trying to get more money.
Yeah, it's like, oh, Americans eat too much meat already, and it's like, what are you talking about? I think 20% of the American diet is meat. That's a
McDonald's.
very low amount. What's
Meat's
Mc-
expensive as it is. That's the big drama. It's so expensive,
Yeah,
to actually buy substantial amounts of it. It's
yeah.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm
bank
trying to be
breaking.
carnivore, which makes it quite expensive for my diet, but I
That's
find that I'm much healthier on meat.
that's a whole different topic, but it's also completely crazy because um, farmers are getting less and less money for what they're selling and like their produce, but
Mm-hmm.
the like the big meat industries are getting more and more money because they keep raising their prices, which is crazy because it's getting to the point where meat is going to be a luxury because it's going to be so far out of reach compared to a living wedge.
Just
There are a lot of bankruptcies happening in America, I think, at the moment with cattle ranches and stuff like that. When it
Yeah.
comes to the whole pandemic Corona thing, has been ruining local businesses because I think they've been euthanizing thousands and thousands of animals, which is ridiculous, and pouring out gallons and gallons and gallons of milk and wasting, so many animal-based products
Why?
due to this whole thing. Because they're not allowed. I don't know what the legislation is about it, but they're not allowed. They're wasting the local stuff, probably due to the lockdown laws or things that are in place where they can't actually go to work. So these things are going unprocessed and then being wasted. But then you find that they're importing all of their meat and all of their products from different countries where they don't have the same kind of
That's very suspect.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it's like they're trying to put these ranchers out of business.
that's
I could
terrible.
go into.
That's all conspiracy, but
Yeah,
they change that.
yeah.
I know it's just staying on this topic just before we go back to what we were discussing. There's one of the guys I was working with out in Iraq, and he owns his own dairy farm. This guy works in the UK, and obviously with everything that's going on at the minute with COVID and being able to transport stuff, there was becoming a bit of a difficulty for him to get his milk distributed. He has a dairy farm. Uh, he was going into it, and I was like, "Well, how much is it?" Like from a financial perspective, he's not going to give the ins and outs, but from a financial perspective, like how much money are you actually making on milk? And the big three, Asda, sorry if we're not allowed to say this, Asda, Sainsbury's, and Tesco, bought up, from what he was telling me, all the sort of milk, where they do all the pasteurizing of the milk and then they bottle the milk. They bought all of that up so they could set a price for milk. They charge, or they pay the farmers. How much do you think the farmers get per liter of milk, would you
I
say?
actually, a friend of mine was a dairy farmer. They get pennies.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
It's
less
like
than
10.
pennies.
No, what back whenever this was, they got pennies. Like,
Oh,
yeah, per
Mikey,
gallon.
Mikey, what do you think they get per liter? This is what I've been told by a dairy farmer.
I'm pretty sure the last person I talked to about it said that they get like 5p or so per liter.
Can I tell you it's lower? This is what I've been told.
Yeah, yeah.
It's lower. What
I
do you think,
mean,
Dan? Or no, Mikey, go for it.
there's going to be different deals struck with different farms in different places, right? So that's the thing. Over here, it's all done by Dale Farm. So it's not run by the big shopping
Big
brands.
chains.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think Dale Farm are actually a bit better. They actually pay a bit more, as far as
They're both more
uh,
expensive
I'm
too.
aware.
yeah, yeah. You pay
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Yeah.
What? So it is
Well,
lower.
there's
So this is
also Bangor
typically
Made
paying
is
your
getting
farmers.
very big now as well.
Yeah. What do you think, Dan? Just as we're on this, and then we'll go back to
But again,
farmer.
just based on the dairy farm, my friend's dad, who's a dairy farmer, it was only a couple pennies per liter. It really wasn't a lot. They produced an awful lot, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
a lot of their
So
money comes from once the cows are no longer able to produce as well, they can sell them off as meat and things like that.
right.
But then milk
So
itself is a bit different.
so the guy that I'm mentioning here, he was explaining that currently, with at least his region, it is zero point 0.5 of a penny, half a penny a liter of milk. So, and that's yeah, it goes to show, like you say, about like the meat industry and things. Yeah, it's
Well, no, they actually do the same thing now that you mention it, and you've just reminded me about meat packing. For some reason, meat packing plants make more money off the meat than the actual farmer who owned the cow and provided the cow. It's like, oh well, we cut it up and well, they butcher it themselves, send it to the packing plant. The packing plant then packs it and then distributes it. It's like, oh, because we packed it and we distribute it, we get most of the money. It's like, yeah, but it's not your, but you have to work off our infrastructure. It's like, it I think it's just greedy, to not pay your farmers.
yeah,
Yeah. No,
yeah. The
it
people
is. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
people supporting going to keep the country afloat, particularly in this sort of time where everything's a bit.
And this is why it's so important. We're sort of going off topic, and the new message now is support your local farms. But
I mean, it's also a fairly relevant and good topic.
yeah,
But shopping locally is great if you can afford it.
yeah, maybe we should even have another podcast on this. That would be quite good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I think so.
Um, again, it's about affording it because obviously you can go to Tesco and you can get a pack of mints. Say, I don't know what weight's a pack of mints, like half a kilo or something.
Something like that.
And
You can get
yeah,
kilo packs for 500 grams or whatever.
yeah, and it's £1.50, £2
Mm.
50. Whereas if you
Yeah,
go
before it
to
dies in water.
if you go 10 minutes out the road to some farm that has a farm shop and you're like, could I get the same amount of mints? They're gonna go, oh, that's 4.50. So you're
Well, that's
paying,
exactly why I go to butchers because you pay less for better quality.
yeah.
Like anytime, say if you go to buy,
Like I've said to you before, my problem with butchers is every butcher I've been to recently have all had lean. Everything is lean, gym ready
yeah,
meats,
but that's
and
because
you're
that's
like,
their target
yo,
audience.
no, give me, see that big piece of bacon with a massive slab of fat on it? Yeah, give me that.
Yeah.
I want that.
Fat equals flavor, amongst other things.
Well, yeah,
Well,
that's
fat
true.
and sugar. If you don't have any sugar, you need the fat. That's why you never go for low fat either. If you're going for low fat yogurt, they took the fat out and replaced it with either sugar or sweetener, and sweeteners can be worse sometimes.
Yeah,
I would say most of the time.
yeah,
Sweeteners don't agree with me, but they have a similar effect when it comes to insulin response, and there's a lot of other issues related to them and weight gain.
yeah,
But oh, it's diet. Lose weight, it's diet. That's why a lot of other countries in the EU they don't call it diet. They call it like say Coke Light or something like that, which I think is a bit more accurate. Or the
yeah,
zero ones because it is 0 calories technically. But
But then that's scary if you think you're drinking a liquid. Obviously, water is 0 calories. This is where someone tells me actually there's 3 calories. Um, but you're drinking something that has 0 calories and has goodness knows what chemicals are in it. Like,
you can read it on the bottle. It's not good.
yeah.
yeah, and you're pumping your
Well, it's
body
like
full of this. You're,
it's
you're, you're
the
wondering what it's doing to your
zero.
filters, like your liver, your kidneys, everything else.
Yeah.
Your
Well, it's like the
digestive
zero
tract.
calorie non-cooking sprays. I used to use them, and now I realize you really shouldn't. But they're not 0 calories. Apparently, there's a tolerance level. So if it's below a certain percentage, they're allowed to round down. Yeah. So
Not
it's
the
like,
normal. You round up. No, you round down instead.
yeah. And if you read the serving size as well as a single spray, how often do you see people do a single spray? They're like all over the whole
I
thing.
mean, you've cooked with, like Fry Light or whatever, the spray.
Yeah, not
Ugh.
that specific brand, but yeah.
You can't. No, I haven't used that brand, but I get what you mean.
I've used various other brands.
Various brands. Yeah, you've used them. Whenever you spray like the wee bottles, it's never enough.
No.
If you do one spray, you put bacon in that pan. That bacon is sticking to that pan.
It depends on the quality of the pan. If you got a good quality Teflon pan, but most people don't, and they're all scratched up. But Teflon's another thing that you should really avoid.
But I mean, that's the point. To get a good cooking pan, you're talking what? £40 plus?
Hmm?
To get a good
40
a good like
a good
pan to cook
frying
in,
pan. Yeah.
you're talking
Oh,
30,
oh,
40
yeah.
pound and up.
Yeah.
You were like, that's a heavy pan.
Yeah. American just clicked and he's like, what? 40-pound
Well,
pan? Damn.
It's like your cast iron pan, Dan, or your
carbon steel,
carbon steel. Yeah. Like you paid some money. Like, but then you pay
I
you
didn't
pay good
actually.
money.
That was cheap.
Oh, don't be saying that.
No, it's actually pretty good. No, well, it's cheaper than what you'd expect. I think it was only about £30
Yeah,
for the
you're
carbon
still
steel.
paying 30 quid for a pan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
you know
it'll
it's not going to have.
last forever.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Exactly.
Most of them are made out of cheap aluminium, and they're lined with Teflon, so they're non-stick. And then after a time, if you ever accidentally rapidly cool it after cooking something, you end up with this warping, and then you get a lot of leaching into the food, and that's not good. So you want to either stick with carbon steel, stainless steel, untreated stainless steel, or carbon steel. So yeah, cast iron, carbon steel, stainless steel. If you have a Teflon pan, it should only be reserved for eggs and pancakes, and that's it.
I realized one day after Ryan had moved out that there was no pans in the house. The only pan, you remember that licky pan we had? The one that somehow the bottom managed to burn through on it. So whenever you cook, like fat drips through the bottom.
Yeah, I think that was because the Teflon was worn away, so the protective coating was gone, and then it was just the bare metal. And then
Yeah.
when it reacted with tomatoes, the acid that's in tomatoes,
Yeah.
it just burned through.
Yeah. Even though there's no visible holes or anything, but it just seeps
made it
through.
more porous.
Yeah. So
Porous pan. Yum.
yeah.
Porous pan.
So I had no pans in the house, and I was like, crap, I've just bought all this food I need to make my dinner in. So the only place that was open that I thought I could have got it was B&M. So I went and got some cheap pans in B&M with the intention of only using them a couple of times, and I have only used them a couple of times. But last time I used it, I made up like a little sauce because I realized I didn't have any sauce for my food. And I poured the sauce in, and the pan, if this is the pan flat, went like this. The whole thing bent and started wrapping up like you're like a pancake, like you're actually making a wrap, like a food. Just came up and started folding in, and I was like, "What the?"
Like a crepe kind of pancake.
Yeah. It just it just started folding in itself. Yeah. If you think of like a rolled pancake, yeah. It just started, the whole pan started folding in. So, and I mean, like, they were, I don't know, £5 or something, really cheap. And like I said, I only intended to use them for a couple of things. But
no, they're not even worth buying as far as I'm concerned.
No, they're not. Well,
there's a few brands I could give you that are worth buying.
I need to get a cast iron pan.
If you know how to season it. If not, then you're just going to end up with a rusty pan. Most people know how to. Yeah, cast iron has a lot of maintenance involved.
Yeah.
Same with carbon steel, but not as much. That's why I like the carbon steel. You can get away with more mistakes on a carbon steel pan. It's got a higher steel to iron ratio.
Yeah. So we'll go back to the topic.
I was just thinking that.
Tangent. But I mean, it can fit in anyway because so you were saying for autoimmune disease, they, for the most part, they don't really know what causes it.
Yeah.
For most diseases, but is there anything they know that can help fight against or prevent any autoimmune disease?
this is probably why it was good to go on the little bit of a tangent talking about various different, contributing factors, potential contributing factors, because environmental things matter, diet matters.
Yeah.
So the
Obviously, there's
the only
like of
way,
gluten and that type of
yeah.
stuff, but
So we know about gluten, avoid gluten. So
yeah.
when it comes to autoimmune, it's the only thing you can really do is figure out what your triggers are, and the best way to do that dietary wise or environmentally, because there's certain environmental triggers that can happen. Like in the case of psoriasis, some people find that if you're in a highly humid environment, that can be a trigger. Some people find that if they're in a dry environment, that could be a trigger. There's other stress factors. So being able to minimize your stress may reduce the likelihood of a flare up. But as far as diet
Quick,
goes,
quick one on that. Quick one on that. I think the key word is may, because
uh,
there's. You
did I
did
say?
say it. Yeah, yeah, you
Okay.
said may, and it's key just to point that out. I think
Yeah.
may.
But again, there's so many other contributing factors. So the way that I think about it with diet, I'm always going to go back to the carnivore diet or the Weston A. Price diet. But there are two other ones that I'd like to mention, because these are less of a diet in the traditional sense of you must eat and only this, otherwise you're going to make yourself unhealthy. This is more of a, these are more ways of thinking about your food in a different way. So it's all about getting adequate amounts of nourishment, changing your relationship with food. So the other two that I want to mention there is the have you ever heard of the GAPS diet?
No.
Nope.
No. So GAPS stands for gut and psychology syndrome. So it's the way that your gut microbiome sort of works with things. So it's a reductive diet, similar to the carnivore diet. I think the carnivore is a little bit more extreme than the GAPS diet, but you essentially remove out any kind of potential allergen from your diet. So you're taking out all plants and vegetables. You're taking out dairy. You're essentially just reducing it down to what a strict carnivore diet would be, which is just sort of like meat and water, some eggs. Some people do obviously have issues with eggs. And then once your gut starts to heal, then you can start reintroducing foods and figuring out what actually causes your trigger.
Mhm.
The other diet I was going to just briefly touch on, it's called it's like a low FODMAP diet. So again, the only thing you're removing from your diet are FODMAPs. So those are fermentable, uh, oli- it's hard to pronounce, fermentable oligo D monosaccharide and polyols. So yeah, so those are the things.
Memorable.
Yeah. So the only sugar your body can actually fully utilize without having to do any kind of filtration or conversion or detoxification is glucose.
Mhm.
Everything else has to be either converted, fermented in some way. So these are all of your fermentable, like I think the polyols are your alcohol sugars. So the likes of xylitol, anything with all on the bottoms, you have xylitol, sorbitol, those kind of things. They ferment in your gut, and they actually, just a fun aside, they actually do cause diarrhea. So they very clearly have some gut related effects. But if you can reduce those, because these diets remove, uh, what's the word, allergy sort of inducing effects for a period of time for your body to recover, because if your diet is the standard UK diet or the standard American diet, whatever we want to look at it, where you're eating mostly processed carbohydrates, a lot of plant food because they tell you low in saturated fats, you've done some damage to your gut. So allowing it to rest and repair, then reintroducing certain foods that you enjoy, figuring out whether or not that's still a trigger for you. If it is a trigger, like once you find out, and I can attest this because I've done this before where I've removed certain uh, FODMAPs out of my diet. I used to be heavily addicted to zero sugar stuff. Pete would remember I was always drinking diet things because I was told 0 calories. That's all that matters. Calories, that's it. I removed them over time. It took me a while to remove them out of my diet. But then now, if I take even a sip of diet Coke or any other diet soda, the aspartame I found triggers migraines for me. I get really horrible, nasty migraines anytime I take artificial sweeteners, that are polyols. So I can't handle aspartame or xylitol and other sweeteners like that either. Uh, what are you guys thinking about that? about changing your diet up, reducing it down to what you can tolerate. So again, if you're still having certain flare-ups, again, start
Yeah.
removing foods out,
Well,
figuring out what works for you. It is a process. It could take
yeah,
years. My
of
diet
course.
lasted me
Uh,
6 years or longer, 8 years, something like that.
so Mrs. and I were discussing this the other day. And a lot of people tend to, well, from her experience and from people she knows with similar conditions and things, um, you tend to, if you have one, or the theory is, if you have one autoimmune condition, you probably have multiples. And this is going to sound like I'm going off on a random tangent. Um, so obviously, I've mentioned I've got psoriasis. From a diet perspective, I don't know if there's any particular triggers from a diet perspective. I've no idea. I know stress does. My father passed away many years ago, and whenever I was in hospital, my psoriasis flared up like nobody's business. Like my face was in turmoil, my scalp was in turmoil. Um, Touching then back on having multiple autoimmune, I've never necessarily been officially diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, which falls under various different categories like Crohn's disease, which a lot of people have heard of, which is debilitating. That's extreme. That's a irritable bowel disorder. Um, you've got ulcerative colitis and stuff like that. Things like that. I think diet. It's a gastrointestinal thing, so diet is going to have a big part to play in that. And for me, for example, I believe I do have IBS. There's certain signs and symptoms that would be quite suggestive. I'll not go too much into this um, as to what those are, but I have certain signs and symptoms that would suggest I have IBS. And they say things like, say, for example, and this is coming into your lectins, Dan,
Yeah.
one of your particularly I find very interesting subjects, but you do mention a lot as well. Um, it's the likes of onion. Onion is known to be one of the common triggers for the likes of IBS. So finding out
I
there's a
remember
lot of
that.
things, spices, all sorts of stuff. Do you? I think you think you've experienced what you think is IBS, don't you, Mike? You
No,
feel like you've no. Okay, I thought maybe
Yeah,
you.
most definitely not.
related.
But yeah, dairy. It could potentially be one of the triggers, but everyone's different, as we know. Whenever it comes to stuff like that. But for me, I know onion does because as soon as I cut it out, um, or as soon as I reintroduce it, because like maybe last night, for example, I had a curry, there was onion in it. I was like, you know what? I can't be bothered picking that onion out. I'm going to eat it. Today, my guts have been in absolute turmoil. Could be the spices. As you say, spices could be. So it could be a combination of different things there. Although traditionally, I find if I cut out onion from my diet, I don't end up with IBS-like symptoms. So yeah, I think with certain autoimmune conditions, I think working on figuring out what the trigger may be will, and then cutting that out will result in less discomfort, less pain further down the line.
Yeah, so I'm the kind of person that if there is something wrong with me, I will try my best to find it out. I don't like living with the problem. Some people just assume, well, it's part of the aging process and it's only natural. Everybody goes through it. It's like, no, it doesn't. That's not necessarily how it has to happen. There's something clearly wrong. When you were younger, you were able to tolerate it better because young people can tolerate discomfort a lot better. Your immune system is much stronger. You can recover much faster from toxins and things again because a young liver. But whenever I was getting migraines all the time and headaches all the time, it was literally every single day. I was getting to the point where I was having to pop paracetamol every day. Uh, I didn't like that, so I decided to start removing all the things in my diet that I knew were bad for me to begin with, because Mikey, both Pete and Mikey know how much of a sugar addict I am. But I replaced that all with the fake stuff, and the fake stuff made things worse. I had a resistance or a tolerance to it at the beginning because I was drinking so much of it. So my body did develop some antibodies for it, or or it managed to filter it out better, I should say.
And a coping mechanism to deal with it as well.
Yeah. So same with alcohol. Your liver starts producing more enzymes to break down the alcohol much faster. So people who drink a lot tend to be able to drink more. People who drink less tend to get drunk faster and have more hangovers and other effects. Um, but I wanted to figure out what the source of my issue was. I'm still like that, so I do reduce my diet in certain ways. Figure out, okay, right, I'm still not feeling completely well. I've noticed I pay attention to what I eat. So it's like, okay, if I eat, say, tomato sauce, I've noticed recently that tomatoes, I don't feel quite as comfortable when I eat tomatoes I as I used to. Um, it's a nightshade. That could be part of the reason why I'm having issues when it comes to digestion the next day. I don't have too much of a reaction to it, but there is a noticeable, or it's noticeable for me because I'm paying attention. And whenever you're going through any kind of condition, be it autoimmune or any other distress that you may be going through, I think it's important to take a look at what you eat and your environment and figuring out what you can change or take out or remove for a period of time and then reintroduce to see if it is actually a trigger for you.
Yeah. Pete, you were saying about the onions there. They're a massive trigger for you.
Yeah.
I remember one time in particular, whenever we were riding the bikes and we called into my parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, and my mom had some dinner made, and she was like, "Oh, sure, stay for dinner," and you're like, "Yeah, okay." And
Yeah.
then you were halfway through eating it, and you were like, "Are there onions in this?" Mom was like, "Yes."
Yeah.
Oh crap, is that a problem? And you were like, "Well, yeah, I have a feeling they make my stomach do backflips, but
Yeah.
it's fine. I had onion last night anyway." And then like that night, you were like, "Oh my god, I'm so sick."
Yeah, I was in turmoil. I believe that was actually something else. Due to stresses and strains from various weightlifting exercises, I believe. But it's one that's not the easiest to diagnose. But it's hiatal hernia, basically an internal hernia. But yeah,
Yeah.
my
Is that
body
the
wasn't back
diagram
for.
of it?
It just goes to
Yeah,
show though, anything can trigger these things.
no, exactly. Anything can, particularly if it's unknown to you and you're wondering why your body's doing backflips for whatever reason, why your body's in absolute turmoil, while you're feeling unwell. The big drama is realizing or going, hold on, this isn't right, and then going to get it checked out, going to get it diagnosed. It could very well be it's just you've had that one-off reaction, but if it's something that's happening over and over and over again, you've got to start piecing it together and going, this isn't right. I need to get this sorted. And that's why they say with things like, say, for example, bleeding from places you shouldn't bleed. Well, that shouldn't be happening. Go get it checked out. Particularly, I think with men, in a lot of cases, are less likely to go to the doctors about things. They'll choose to ignore certain signs, certain symptoms. Certainly, my previous job, uh, you just manned up. You just got on with it. If you hurt yourself, people would maybe go sick. They'd report to me because that was my job role, was to deal with that. But for the most part, you'd be approached after work hours and be asked, "Oh, Pete, I've got this wrong with me," or they wouldn't approach you at all. And I think we certainly men tend to ignore um, the signs that your body's saying to you something's not right.
Okay, so
So
I'm just weird then because I don't ignore it.
you're not. No, it's not that you're weird. There's nothing weird about that, Dan. Never say that. But the
I,
I think a lot of people tend to just want to keep themselves to themselves and just ignore what their body's screaming at them, or
I
they
I
just don't
just
want to put
moan,
my crap.
or they just moan about it and don't go to the right people to get something done to sort it out. So
I would call Dan a hyper overthinker. So if he thinks there's something wrong with him, he's instantly trying to check out and see what exactly it is, trying to break it down to its base level.
and yeah, a lot of
That's
people. I can do that. Self-diagnosis
yeah.
is
Sure,
is
would probably
never.
be the nicer way to put it because I thought you were going to say hypochondriac, and
No,
which I'm not.
no.
Yeah.
No, but whenever, as far as I've known you, whenever you think there's something wrong, you spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out what it is, watching videos, reading up things online, doing all this different stuff, really breaking down your symptoms to like as bare level as you can to go, okay, well that matches this and this matches that, and to
Yeah, because so
see,
many
well,
symptoms are similar. Like I said, everything's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
it's just trying to figure out which one is most likely, and I guess that's what doctors' their main job is, to
Yeah.
figure out
Well.
based on some
Yeah.
things that you've done in your life what is the most likely, because the most likely explanation is more often than not the right answer. So, but yeah, thank you. That's a nice compliment.
Huh, I guess.
No, well, no, it is. I don't understand why more people aren't like that. Why would you want to feel like crap all the time?
Yeah.
The thing is, if people have felt like that their whole lives, they don't realize there's any other way to feel.
Yeah, to them that's normality.
Yeah.
So, for example, that person that every time they have that big slice of bread, their body starts going into absolute turmoil, and then they start getting their brain fog, or they start getting a rash or whatnot. And they're like, "Yeah, well, that's the way I've always reacted. It's only if and that's obvious. If it's something obvious, I suspect if it's something obvious like that, you're probably going to go, well, that doesn't seem right. No one else is experiencing that every time they eat a piece of bread."
Well, my point would be that I don't see why pain should be the default position.
Yeah.
If you are uncomfortable, if you are in pain, if you find things difficult to do, that isn't normal.
Yeah. Well, on
There is
top of that,
something.
we're only entering into an edge of comfort where we can afford to do that. People aren't in pain. People aren't as much starving and living in these conditions anymore.
Yeah, well, the problem now is overeating.
Yeah,
Obesity
exactly.
becoming a thing, and then that's again eating the certain foods triggering all these other issues. It could be autoimmune in nature, or just like uh, obesity leads to a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like
Um,
not even 100 years ago, people like well, maybe not you guys, but definitely someone like me who doesn't have any particular skill set or like any well-paying job. Like I would have been struggling for food. I would have eaten whatever I could get my hands on within the past 100 years.
Yeah, but 100 years ago, they didn't have the same kind of legislation stopping
But
you from being allowed to fish anywhere that you wanted to fish for food. You're not even allowed to
that's
hunt
true.
anymore without a license, So
Yeah,
they're
that's true.
limiting your ability to get your own food, which I think it's ridiculous.
But at the same time,
Now think about it, 100 years ago, or whatever amount of years ago, would you be able to, would you have the money to farm your own land and grow your own
well,
crops?
my granddad was a farmer. My uncle's a farmer. My dad didn't want to be
Okay,
a
well, you come
farmer,
from a
which
lucky
is
line of farmers then, but
yeah. My dad
I'm
didn't want
just
to be
saying
a
the
farmer,
barrier for
so my
entry.
uncle inherited it.
Yeah,
Um,
but the barrier for entry when it comes to a farm is very high compared to, oh, there's something that looks tasty over there, I'm going to kill it and eat it. And then you can, again,
mine.
you get a deer, you get a wild pig or something. You can be snacking on that for months if you
Not
if
many
you
wild pigs around here anymore.
not anymore, but I mean, like in the past, just
Yeah,
depend again your geographical location.
yeah,
You can, if you utilize the whole animal, it'll feed you for a long time.
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. Like, if if I was born if at in the late 1800s, early 1900s, my dad had decided the rest of my family are farmers. I want to be a mechanic. Whenever the first cars and stuff came around, he had went into mechanic and he had moved into the town. And I was born. I grew up in the 1920s. I would have been one of those guys. Well, for a start, I probably would have had to enlist because I wouldn't have had any other choice because I have no other skills. I would have had to enlist in and go to war. But aside from that, I would have been, very, very much on the breadline. I would have had to eat what I can. Whereas now, I can choose to eat whatever I want because it's accessible. If you know what I
Well,
mean, that's
again,
what
not
that's why
necessarily
people.
true. We were talking about how meat is becoming more expensive, which makes it less accessible. The only thing that is accessible is the cheap crap you can buy from the shops that are mass produced and
heavily processed.
heavily
Yeah.
Yeah,
processed. Yeah.
but this is what I'm saying. Everything's accessible in a way because the internet, the times we're living in, they're fairly new, but at the same time, like even in the 60s, 70s, 80s, people would have just eaten what they were given. I don't know about you, Pete, or even you, Dan, but in my house, whenever I grew up, whatever was on the table was whatever I was eating.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm
That's
not a picky eater. I am now. But I'm polite. I'll eat whatever I'm given.
well, we were always fed carrots in Sweden. I always refused to eat it because I hate carrots and swede with a passion. It's
No, I
disgusting.
hate that too. I wouldn't eat that. Them,
Oh,
peas, and Brussels sprouts.
Hate it. But
oh no.
but at the
But
same
I think
time,
it's
I did eat mostly anything that was put in front of me. So I've grown up with that mentality, and I think a lot of people are the same, which leads to maybe people have been feeling that way from childhood, so they don't recognize it. And even people who have got older and started feeling that, they don't recognize it as well because there's that level of comfort. Or
yeah, but
maybe
it's
people
also
are starting to recognize it more because there's that level of comfort.
well, I think as well, people aren't in control of their food, and that's what's limiting them mostly. Remember, before I even started learning how to cook, I was much the same, where I would just order food and I would buy stuff from the shop, and it was going to be highly processed things. And then I started learning how to cook, and it changed my opinion of food. I think people need to start. Again, 100 years ago, you couldn't just call up a number and have them deliver food unless you were rich. You had to go and make it yourself. So you had a greater understanding of the things that you're putting in your body, and the way that you traditionally prepare food as well is completely different to how you do it now, because people would make porridge nowadays by pouring hot water on oats. That's the disgusting way of making porridge. It doesn't taste good. The texture is terrible, and you don't neutralize any of the anti-nutrients in there. Years ago, you would soak your oats for 24 to 48 hours before you cook them, and then you would find that you have less digestive issues. It was sustainable because you have the calories, so it keeps you alive. But again, as a nutritious thing, nobody considers that nutrition. It's only now, whenever we're getting into the era of heart health, because it lowers cholesterol, that people are saying it's a healthy food. But it was never healthy food before. It was peasant food.
Yeah,
All the rich people ate animal foods and meats and things like that.
yeah. And cakes.
Cakes, yeah, and that's why
Yeah,
their teeth got all messed up.
yeah. There's
Yeah,
quite a
all
few
their
interesting videos out there actually about the difference between in like medieval times, what the different social classes ate, because it was actually fairly routine what they would have eaten for each meal. And if anyone's interested in looking that up, I've
Yeah,
watched a few of
yeah,
them.
no, it would be.
That'll be good
A
for
lot of it.
another topic, another time.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to get into food history. I know a little bit more about that one, but
Yeah.
I think this was an interesting. I know we went on a few tangents, but it does kind of come full circle back to
Yeah.
autoimmune is unknown. You need to figure out what it is in your environment and in your diet that you need to change in order to positively, hopefully positively, affect your own response to it.
Yeah.
But thanks, Pete, for coming on the podcast. How'd you find it? Not too bad.
Yeah, it was good. I do like tangents, to be fair, so
Mhm.
I myself like to go off on random tangents. But no, it was good. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm glad you came.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that is our fifth podcast
Yep.
on autoimmune disease. We hoped you liked it, even though there were quite a few tangents in there.
A little slow moments.
Again, like Dan says, it kind of all comes full circle because most of those tangents were to do with diet, and diet is a big part of staying healthy and why people get sick. So
Yeah. And if I'm in the podcast, it's going to be something that's going to be talked about no matter what.
bread,
Bread. Yeah.
glutens, breads, oats.
Yeah. Lectins,
Yep.
oxidants.
Yeah.
All the fun stuff.
Okay, so that's us. We hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.
Oh,
Peace.
and as always, we're not experts. Just so that we're not experts. Any of this
Speak
is just
for
our
yourselves.
I
not an expert.
was about to
I'm
say
definitely not an
that.
expert.
This is based on opinion and just initial research on certain topics.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, this is all just based on common research and
yeah,
things that
part of the
we've found
conversation-
ourselves.
Part of the point of the conversation is for us to learn from each other as well and get different opinions. And again, if anybody ever has any questions, please feel free to ask so we can. Or if you disagree
Yeah.
with anything that we have to say, it's important you let us know so we can.
Or
better
flat
shape
out
our-
corrections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't forget, like and subscribe and hit that bell button.
Yeah, if you're on YouTube, or
Sell
don't
out.
forget to follow us on SoundCloud or whatever other Apple Podcasts.
Okay.
But I'm Tish. Bye.
Peace.